صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تبارك الذي جعل في السماء بروجا وجعل فيها سراجا وقمرا منيرا وهو الذي جعل الليل والنهار خلفة لمن أراد أن يذكر أو أراد شكورا وعباد الرحمن الذين يمشون على الأرض هونا وإذا خاطبهم الجاهلون قالوا سلاما والذين يبيتون لربهم سجدا وقياما والذين يقولون ربنا اصرف عنا عذاب جهنم إن عذابها كان غراما إنها ساءت مستقرا ومقاما والذين إذا أنفقوا لم يسرفوا ولم يقتروا وكان بين ذلك قواما والذين لا يدعون مع الله إلها آخر ولا يقتلون النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق ولا يزنون ومن يفعل ذلك يلقى أثاما يضاعف له العذاب يوم القيامة ويخلد فيه مهانا إلا من تاب وآمن وعمل عملا صالحا فأولئك يبدل الله سيئاتهم يبدل الله سيئاتهم حسنات وكان الله غفورا رحيما ومن تاب وعمل صالحا فإنه يتوب إلى الله متابا والذين لا يشهدون الزور وإذا مروا باللغو مروا كراما والذين إذا ذكروا بآيات ربهم لم يخروا عليها سما وعميانا والذين يقولون ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما أولئك يجزون الغرفة بما صبروا ويلقون فيها تحية وسلاما خالدين فيها حسنت مستقرا ومقاما قل ما يعبأ بكم ربي لولا دعاؤكم فقد كذبتم فسوف يكون لزاما صدق الله العلي العظيم.
پر محمد و آل محمد صلوات. اکبر میں مر جاواں گی وطنا تے ویر آجا. اکبر میں مر جاواں گی وطنا تے ویر آجا. ویر نام مینوں خواب ڈراندے نے بہن دے درد مکا جا. اکبر میں مر جاواں گی وطنا تے ویر آجا. کوئی ہوندا میرا اپنا میرے اتھرو وندنا آنکھ سر تے میرے کوئی کدی سایہ کردا خاک تو مینوں آن اٹھاندے تھے کہندا تکت تے آ جا. اکبر میں مر جاواں گی وطنا تے ویر آجا. اے ہو رستے ہو بوہے اے ہو مٹھیا اکبر اے ہو ٹانگا اے ہو آسا اے ہو چٹھیا اکبر ویکھ لے اس بین بیرا سانجے سادہ درد وسانجا. اکبر میں مر جاواں گی وطنا تے ویر آجا. میرے دادی کھولو جیوے پھوپھی زینب پچھیا بید بازار دا مینوں بابا مطلب دس جا. اس طرح مینوں پیر نشانہ دا مطلب تو سمجھا جا. اکبر میں مر جاواں گی وطنا تے ویر آجا. اکبر میں مر جاواں گی وطنا تے ویر آجا. روز اکبر سین صغرا اے ہو بردے ہوا آس رہ گئی میرے اکبر تینوں مہندی لاوا اے دسا کن ویر کے وے صغرا آن کے سہر لا جا. اکبر میں मर जावांगी वतना ते वीर आजा वीर नाम नु ख्वाब डरांदे दे बहन दर्द मुका जा अकबर में मर जावांगी वतना ते वीर आजा मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can we please recite Surah Fatiha for all the names on the screen displayed now? A dua shafa is requested for Dr. Liaquat Dawji and all Maries, please. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amma yujibul mustarra idha da'a yakshifu as-su'. Amma yujibul mustarra idha da'a wa yakshifu as-su'. Amma yujibul mustarra idha da'a yakshifu as-su'. Amma yujibul mustarra idha da'a yakshifu as-su'. And before we begin the session, can we please all stand up, move to the front as close as possible, and at the same time, please welcome up Syed Muhammad Rizvi with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أفضل الموجودات العبد المؤيد الرسول المصدد المصطفى الأمجد والمحمود الأحمد سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا صاحب الوقار والسكينة المدفون بأرض المدينة أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم وهو أصدق القائلين وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا تتلى عليهم آيات الرحمن خروا سجدا وبكيا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all and myself the tawfiq of the ziyarah of Imam Jawad. Salamullah alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And if we die before that, may Allah allow us to benefit from his shafa'ah. Salamullah alayhi. As we approach the month of Muharram, as we come close to the days of A'za, the days of mourning, as we once again enter the month in which we grieve and mourn and will wear black to show our signs of sadness and sorrowness and huzn. Like every year, there are certain questions that are reposed and require revision. And like every year, whenever the month of Muharram comes, you will hear from some of the Muslims, especially those who don't agree with us, in mourning, in showing sadness, in shedding tears, in crying for the Imams of Muhammad, be that for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam or Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam, for kulluhum min nurin wahid. It doesn't matter if you cry for Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam or you cry for the 11th Imam or the 10th or the 9th Imam, because they are from one nur, because they are from one light, their haqq upon us is one. In other words, when we send salawat, all of them are in the salawat. And when we dissociate ourselves from their enemies, if we dissociate ourselves from the enemies of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, naturally we dissociate ourselves from the enemies of the Imam that we come here tonight to commemorate his martyrdom. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran, the verse that I've chosen for tonight is that of Maryam 58. إِذَا تُطْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُ الرَّحْمَنِ. Allah says, whenever the verses of the Holy Quran are recited upon them, whenever the verses of the merciful are recited upon them, خَرُّ سُجَّدًا وَبُكِيًّا. They fall to the ground, they prostrate, crying with tears. So Allah mentions crying in the Holy Quran. for the believers, for those who hear the ayat of the Holy Quran. They bow to him and they have shed tears. So buka or crying, when people say, well, why tears? Something that happened 1400 years ago, why tears now? What use is this tear? Imam al-Jawad salamullah alayhi was killed such a long time ago. Why the crying now? Why Muharram? Why the azar? Why the black? What is the point of that now? When we analyze, let's analyze crying for a few minutes. Why does a person cry? And how many types of crying are there? There are different discussions on this. Some have said that there are 4 types of crying. Some have said 5. Some have said more, some have less. One of the ulama who I was reading, he says, look, the first type of crying is the crying for your belief, which is what Allah mentioned in this verse of Surah Al-Maryam. Just ayat were recited and they cried. But why do you cry? It's just a ayah. You remember in the time of Rasulullah, what does history say? Whenever verses of the Holy Quran would be revealed on the Prophet, and if they mentioned azab or qiyamah, many of the companions would tremble and cry. Rasulullah would cry. Sometimes Jibreel would come down with wahi, with revelation. Rasulullah would have tears in his eyes. The Muslims, Ahlul Bayt, the companions would have tears in their eyes. They haven't seen Akhirah. Nobody's seen Jahannam, nobody's seen Jannah, nobody's seen Barzakh, nobody's seen that Sirat. Yet just by hearing those ayat, those verses that speak of Akhirah, the dunya that is to come after this, they would cry. What crying is this? They're not feeling, no one's attacking, they're not feeling a pain. This crying is a crying of Aqidah. The verse of Allah, Allah is speaking to them about Qiyamah, there's tears. And sometimes you just hear the word. It touches you. Somebody says Ali. Sometimes it makes you happy. Sometimes it brings tears in your eyes. Why? Because it's a part of your Aqidah. Sometimes somebody says the name Hassan or Hussein. You just hear the name. Nobody recited Masaib. Nobody's going in the details just yet. Just by hearing the name of Hassan or Hussein, it brings tears to your eyes. You know why? Because those 2 names form a part of your Aqidah. So this type of crying is the crying for my belief, for my Aqidah. Number 2, then the scholars, when they discuss crying, they say, no, there's another type. This is when you miss somebody. For example, if my parents have passed away, sometimes I remember my parents, and just the thought of my father brings tears to my eyes. Or just sometimes I remember my mother, and the thought of her being around and now no longer around brings tears to the eyes. You know why? Because you miss them. It's natural. This is exactly what we say in the ziyarat. Ya laytani kuntu ma'ak. Ya laytana kunna ma'akum. Oh, how I wish I was with you, O Hussein, on the day of Ashura. Ya laytani kuntu ma'ak. How I wish. And so when they say, well, look, crying is actually a sign of cowardice. Only cowards cry. The brave don't cry. Right? That's one of the things they will say to mock you if you cry. Well, the brave doesn't cry. Well, here, what are we saying? Ya laytana kunna ma'ak. We are not crying because we're scared. We're crying that we were not there. The difference. We're saying that we wish we were there with Aba Abdullah al-Hussein on that fateful day. That is a crying of the brave. It's not a crying of a coward. That is not somebody who's backing. That is somebody who's saying, I wish I was there. And you've got to be brave to be on the day. To be there with Imam Hussein alayhi salam, you ought to be brave. You have to be brave. Because it was the brave who stood with Aba Abdullah. The Shuja. Those who are willing to sacrifice everything for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Holy Imam. So that is one for Aqidah. Two, when we miss, sometimes we say in the du'as and the ad'iyas, Allahumma inna nashku ilayka faqda nabiyyana, ghaybata nabiyyana, ghaybata waliyyana. We are complaining, we are crying. Why? Because, oh Allah, your Prophet is no longer here. Oh Allah, your last hujjah is not amongst us. In the zahir. That crying is because we miss the Prophet. We miss the Imam. How we wish we could live, or we were living at a time when one of the Imams were here in zahir. Okay? Number 3 is a crying because the heart is merciful. You see something that brings tears to your eyes. You see a child that is dying in the arms of the father or the mother. You see somebody starving to death. Brings tears to your eyes. Yes? Every day when you see children dying in Gaza, brings tears to you. Why? Because the heart is merciful. If it doesn't, then there's something wrong with the heart. And those who cry for the children of Hussein, they know better to cry for innocent children. Children are innocent. This type of crying is a crying out of mercy. You see something, a sad sight doesn't leave the mind sometimes for weeks and months. Sometimes never. Yet if you allow me to say, you never saw what Hussein saw on the day of Ashura. You've only heard, you've only read some of that which took place. And hence we have in the narrations that Imam Hussein alayhi salam would say, I wish my Shia were here to see how I asked for water for that small child of mine. Hearing is something else, and seeing is something else. There's another type of crying. Yet when it comes, and then there's crying for sins. And by the way, crying because you miss somebody, Allah speaks about that in the Quran for the Prophet Yaqub. وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ. He cried so much that his eyes, they went white, they lost sight. His eyesight became weak. وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ. From what? مِنَ الْحُزْنِ. From sorrow, from grief, from crying. This is the Prophet crying. Allah doesn't condemn him. This is Allah's praise for him. And for those, إِذَا تُطْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُ الرَّحْمَنِ, Surah Al-Maryam. And when the ayat of the merciful are recited upon them, they fall into sajda, crying with tears. That's Abu Darda, one of the companions of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says, one day I saw Amir al-Mu'mineen in Kufa. He took to a bustan or a garden where there was palm trees. He found a shade under a palm tree. And by God, the way he cried, I would never forget. He cried and cried in sajda until he went quiet. I thought for a second Ali's ruh had left the body. I came running to tell somebody, look at Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. And when they came, they said, no, this is how Ali cries every night in his salatul layl, in his munajat, in his du'as, in his prayers. You've been to that mihrab in Masjid of Kufa, where Ali ibn Abi Talib would pray his nafilah, where he would recite the munajat that you read today, munajat Amir al-Mu'mineen, where he would shed tears. So, even the Imams were known to shed tears. When all of these 4 to 5 types of cryings, we put all of them together, all of them are befitting for the Imams of Al Muhammad. Be it for Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam or Imam al-Jawad. We wish we were there for Imam al-Jawad. How we miss the holy Imam. The sadness of what happened to this, the youngest Imam. They say the oldest, well, history says, Shaykh al-A'imma, al-Imam al-Sadiq, wa shababuhum al-Imam al-Jawad. The oldest of the Imams was Imam al-Sadiq. Hence, Shaykh al-A'imma. Wa shababu, the youngest one, al-Imam al-Jawad. 25 years and a few months. Let's look at Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam. Does he cry? And if so, for who? The Rawi says, I was sitting in the company of Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida alayhi salatu was salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And his son, the Imam after him, was very young. And he was sitting in front of him on the floor. And Imam Rida alayhi salam was watching his son. And clearly, Imam Rida is sitting in front of him. On the floor is Imam al-Jawad. Imam Muhammad Taqiyan al-Jawad. He says, all of a sudden there were tears in his eyes, in the eyes of Imam al-Jawad. He looks up to the sky as if he's distressed, upset. The Imam says, my son, Ya bunayya bi abi anta wa ummi. How much Imam Rida alayhi salam loved Imam al-Jawad. You know that hadith, right? No birth of any child in Islam has been so filled with blessing and barakah for our Shia except the birth of Imam al-Jawad. We don't have this hadith for any Imam, by the way. Where Imam Rida alayhi salam says for Imam al-Jawad. When people said, you don't have a son, how are you an Imam? He said, Allah will soon bless me with a son. His birth will carry more barakah and blessing for the Shia more than anybody else. You know why? Because the coming of Imam al-Jawad salamullah alayhi not only confirmed his own Imam, it also confirms the Imam of his father. Because they said, we won't accept him unless he has a son. So Imam al-Jawad alayhi salam comes in this dunya, is born. His own Imam is confirmed, and so is the Imam of Imam Rida alayhi salam. He says, oh my son, what brings tears to your eyes? Why do you look so upset? Why do you look so sad? The Imam is grieving. In that young age, you know what he says? فَقَالَ سَلَامُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ. Oh my father, I cry. Why do you cry? Why are you upset? What is bothering you? What is here? And he looks up and he says, فِيمَا صُنِعَ بِأُمِّ فَاطِمَةِ أَمَا وَاللَّهِ لَأُخْرِجَنَّهُمَا وَأُحْرِقَنَّهُمَا. Why do you cry? Oh my son Jawad. He says, oh father, because I remember what they did to my mother Fatima. And then it says, oh by God, I wish I could pull them out of their graves and burn them for what they did to my mother Fatima. And you have similar narrations when it comes to the 12th Imam as well, that the Holy Imam will avenge the killers of Sayyidah Zahra. So the hate for the killers of Sayyidah Fatima is common in all of the A'immah. And the tears for Sayyidah Fatima is common in all of the A'immah. And Imam al-Sadiq once is told by a companion, I have a daughter. What have you named her? Fatima. He cries. You've named her Fatima. Make sure you never slap her. Treat her differently. And Imam al-Jawad and Sayyidah Zahra, there is a gap. If you calculate the gap between the martyrdom of Sayyidah Zahra and the birth of Imam al-Jawad, it's over 180 plus years. 50 years is enough to forget somebody. You don't even remember them. 100 years, you're not even around, according to the standards of the modern day life expectancy. 150 years, there's 2-3 generations. 180 plus years. Yet he sits there shedding tears. Fima sun'a bi ummi Fatima. It shows you it's not about time. Not about time. Rather, it's about principle. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He doesn't like people to shout. And you know the verse of the Holy Quran? لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. Allah does not want anyone to shout and cry, oh, that happened. Or shed tears or wail or lamenting. Va vaila. Why? Illa man dhulim. Except the Mazloom. Otherwise, no. But if the Mazloom does it, absolutely. If after Imam Hussein alayhi salam said that Zainab does it, absolutely. If after Imam al-Jawad, Imam Ali al-Hadi alayhi salam does it, absolutely. And if until the day of judgment we do it as the Shia of al-Muhammad, absolutely. Because we are Mazloom, our Imams are Mazloom. We're still Mazloom. Some of us practically Mazloom. Some areas around the globe. But what about the traditions which the Muslims will present, especially as we go to Muharram? But the Prophet forbid crying. Anybody who cries for the dead, the crying and the lamenting and the weeping of the family members will lead to azab for the mayyat. Who's heard this? Common hadith, or so-called hadith, which is used against us. Don't cry on the mayyat. Why? Because the Prophet put a stop to it. Okay, but then what about the hadith where the Prophet cried? Because we know the Prophet cried. We know the Prophet cried. But before that, there's a hadith, there's a narration, not a hadith, but a riwayah. When the second caliph was dying, his daughter Hafsa was crying over him. And he looked at her, he says, why do you cry? Did the Prophet not say this is not allowed? Don't cry over me. Who narrates this? Her brother, Abdullah ibn Umar. He says, my father opened his eyes and he said to her, Hafsa, don't cry. The Prophet said, nobody should cry over the dead, or the dead is punished. Not sure what the mayyat has done, but the mayyat is punished for the crying of the other person. And so the narrations that forbid from crying come either from the second caliph, his son, or his daughter. If you bring all of them together. Marhum Allama Ayatollah said Askari, he's written on this, Murtada Askari. He has written on this extensively. He says all of the narrations that say don't cry for the dying person, none of them actually go back to the Prophet. They go back to these three. Abdullah ibn Abbas says Abdullah ibn Abbas was there. He says, I heard this and I was shocked. He says, I had never heard anything like this. So I came to the wife of the Prophet, the daughter of the first. I came to her. I said, this is what he's just said. Can you testify to that? You're the wife of the Prophet. She says, what did he say? He said that anybody who cries over the dying, Allah will punish him for those who cry over him. She says, no, by God, I've never heard the Prophet say anything like that. This is his khata. This is his mistake. So even that hadith within Islamic circles, narrators is disputed. It doesn't go back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It goes back to Abdullah ibn Umar or his father. Now the same Muslim in Bukhari would also tell you, same Muslim in Bukhari, that the Prophet had a son by the name of Ibrahim, who was buried in Baqi. You go to Baqi, there's a grave there. They'll tell you this is the grave of Ibrahim, the young son of the Prophet who died young, only a year and a half. Just imagine, a year, for those of you who have children, year and a half, the child's walking, maybe running a little bit, speaking a little bit, saying a few sentences, communicate. It's an adorable age. At that age, the Prophet's son is breathing his last breaths. Who narrates this? Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. And this Abdul Rahman is no friend of the Ahlul Bayt. He was in the Shura. He sees Rasulullah enter upon Ibrahim and he takes him into his lap. And Abdul Rahman ibn Auf says, I saw the Prophet, tears were flowing from his cheeks and they were falling onto Ibrahim. As his son would open his eyes and close his eyes. Imagine seeing, when you see a young child like that, just seeing your child like that, holding your child at that age, gives you a sukoon. But yet imagine when you are to bury a child like that. The Prophet's heart was breaking. Abdul Rahman says, Ya Rasulullah, you and cry? You're going to cry over this? He says, yes, Abdul Rahman. The eyes are tearful and the heart is breaking, but I shall not make any complaint to Allah. Yes, we don't complain. Crying is not a complaint. Because sometimes people will tell you, well, if you're crying, you're complaining. No. It's natural. The heart breaks. Sometimes tears don't flow because the heart becomes hard. Sometimes a person can see the most difficult things and is not moved. Like in Karbala. One of the most difficult things was when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he brought out his son Ali al-Asghar. And when Imam Hussein alayhi salam gave a short speech, short khutbah, Ya qawmin lam yarhamuni, oh people, if you do not have any rahmah or mercy on me, have mercy on this child. When nobody was moved, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam said something here. He says, the reason why none of you are moved by this, which everybody should be moved by, doesn't matter which side you're on, when you see a child in such desperation, a child who, even if you were to give him water now, would not survive, has reached such a point. The Imam says it's because your stomachs are filled with haram. And when the stomach is filled with haram, this becomes dead. And when this is dead, then there is no hope. It's just strange what the Imam says. He gave a principle. If you want this to be dead, then you fill this with haram. And vice versa. The Prophet says, the eyes are tearful. My heart is breaking. Because it's natural, of course I'll cry. Abdul Rahman, nothing wrong with it. I'm not complaining to Allah. When the Prophet from Revelation got the news that his cousin, his brother Ja'far had died, Ja'far al-Tayyar, he came on the minbar. And as it was happening, the Prophet's not there. As it was happening, he would narrate to them. Now Ja'far has been hit. Now Ja'far has become a shaheed, a martyr. Now Ibn Rawaha has been killed. All of those revelations that were coming to the Prophet was announcing it, and as he was announcing on the minbar, he had tears in his eyes. He was crying. And then he comes straight away to the house of who? To the house of Asma, the wife of Ja'far. He takes the children, he sits them into his lap. He kisses them, he embraces them. Asma says, Ya Rasulullah, what is the matter? Today you are in a sad, strange mood. He says, Asma, may Allah give you ajr for Ja'far now flies with the malaika in Jannah. Because you know Ja'far lost both of his arms, like Abul Fadl Abbas salamullahi alayh. The Prophet crying. Tabari, the books of Seerah, which have been written by non-Shia authors and writers. Hamza is in front of you, Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, salamullah alayh. When the news reached and when the Prophet saw the sight of Hamza, because he saw him and then he covered him with his Abba. When he saw the sight of Hamza, it is said, straight away the Prophet began to cry. And he would not want to look at Wahshi even after later when Wahshi accepted Islam. He says, Wahshi, you leave from here. Because Wahshi is the one who, because whenever I see Wahshi, it reminds me of the body of my uncle Hamza. Oh, Wahshi, you stay away. Wahshi stayed in his house. It is only after Rasulullah died and left this dunya, Wahshi would start coming out into the markets, into the bazaars. And it is said that he would instruct the women to come and cry. Come and cry for Hamza. He would instruct the women. Why is nobody crying for my uncle? Everybody has mourners. Why is nobody crying here? Yes? So, you analyze the hadith. Analyze all of the narration. There's far more narrations on crying, and there's almost none, or just a handful on not crying. I'll give an example, which is used against us. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, when he was leaving final farewell with his sister Bibi Zainab, he says to her, "Oh Zainab, I am to leave. After me, do not hit your head or your face. After me, do not lament. After me, do not tear your shirt or your veil, which was a sign of grief. All of these things." And so this hadith was brought out and used against the, look, this hadith destroys all of your azadari. Your azadari, you're crying, you're mourning, lamenting. This one hadith. Imam Hussein himself was against azadari, wal ayadhu billah. Yes? How do we reply? How do we respond? Number one, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam never said to her, don't cry. Even if you take the hadith. Crying is buka. Bakiyan. Imam al-Hussein salamullah alayhi in the hadith never says don't cry. Number one. Number two, where does the hadith come from? You find this hadith in Irshad of al-Mufid. But the hadith is mursal. It does not have a chain. Where does it come from? He gets it from Tabari. He narrates it from Tabari. Tabari, of course, not Shia. And even Tabari has brought the hadith in his book without any chain. So automatically the hadith becomes weak. And a weak hadith cannot be used against several authentic narrations. I'm not saying if it's a weak hadith it should be discarded. No, sometimes weak hadiths, narrations are accepted if there are other evidences around it. But definitely a weak hadith cannot be used in the face of numerous authentic narrations. Everybody accepts that. There's no difference of opinion on this. It's mursal, doesn't have a chain. Mufid has taken it from Tabari. He hasn't provided any evidence how it got here, where did it come from. Number one, so it's weak. Number two, even if you put all of that aside and accept that for a second, that Imam Hussein before going says to Bibi Zainab, "Oh Bibi Zainab, do not hit your head, do not hit your face, do not lament and show signs of sorrow and grief." Even if we were to accept that, we said that was only for a specific time. Why? Because Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam did not want Sayyida Zainab to show her weakness in front of the enemy. I don't know if this is getting to you or not. It was on, even if we accept, we don't even accept the hadith, but let's say we do. We say it was for a specific time because to lament and to weep and to show grief and huzn and sorrow is to show you are da'if in front of the enemy. And if Sayyidah Zainab showed her weakness, what would happen to the other women of Al Muhammad? Sayyidah Zainab, her jihad was to begin. Sayyidah Zainab would become Abbas. Sayyidah Zainab would become the standard bearer. Sayyidah Zainab would lead. Sayyidah Zainab would bring out Imam Sajjad from the burning tents, from the Mukhayyam. Imam al-Hussein did not want Sayyidah Zainab to show any sign of weakness to the enemy or to his children. And so Bibi Zainab did that. She showed her strength. She showed her courage. How she looks into the enemy, into his eyes, and she says, "Ma ra'aytu illa jamila." Even if we were to accept that hadith, we say it was for a time period. At that moment, that was the maslaha, that was the thing. And finally, the narration that speak of crying are too many to ignore. From Rasulullah to Imam al-Zaman in his Ziyaratul Nahiya. All of them. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam al-Hasan, all of them cried for Aba Abdullah. And the same thing with Imam al-Jawad, salamullah. He remembers his grandfather. He remembers his grandmother. And so the narrations are clear. So as we now enter and prepare ourselves to go towards the month of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, these things are important to keep in the mind. And as the hadith says, on the day of judgment, every eye shall cry, except the eye that weeps upon Aba Abdullah, the one that weeps upon Al Muhammad. My last point, inshallah, before I end, as we weep this holy Imam, as we come to remember this holy Imam, remember in the short 25 years, this holy Imam lived amongst the Shia. He establishes the Shi'i identity. He establishes in those short 25 years, he establishes a school of thought that they wanted to kill, that they wanted to eliminate. Yes. With certain things we are different. But we're not afraid to be different. We don't want to be isolated. We are part of the Ummah. We are part of the Muslim body. But we're much more than that. We're khas, we're specific when it comes to Islam. Al-Imam al-Jawad established that. You remember when Al-Mamun was passing through Baghdad and the children were playing on the street? Everybody runs because you see the king is coming with his guards and his bodyguards and his soldiers. Everybody runs apart from one. He says, who is this child? They said, this is Ibn al-Rada. This is the son of Imam Rada alayhi salam. He says, young boy, why did you not move when everybody else moved? He says, why should I move? I haven't committed a crime. I haven't done anything wrong. And neither is the street so narrow that you couldn't pass. Imam, everybody runs. He's different. He says, he's different. Who is this? He says, this is the son of Ar-Rada. The same Imam Rada al-Mamun had poisoned. This is his son. He says, I knew it. The Imam stood out different. If Azadari makes us different, unique, so be it. If our Husseini identity makes us different, so be it. Proclaim it. Be proud. In the court of the Abbasids, a thief is caught and he's brought in front of the Caliph. He brings the mufti. He says, well, obviously we have to cut his hands now. It's a thief. Where should we cut it? He just cut it by the palms. He asked Imam al-Jawad, what is your aqidah? I don't know what it was, but even the enemies of Ahlul Bayt would eventually come and ask them. Because sometimes deep down you know who's right. You avoid them, but you end up coming to them. Like the ones that came before them. They would come back to Ali. They would come back to Ali. We don't know, ask Ali. We don't know, ask Ali. And then they would say, may Allah not raise us in a time where Ali is not there to help us. Ya Muhammed ibn Ali, Rada, what do you say? The Imam says, no, he's wrong. Imam is young. This is a grand mufti, or he's old, white beard. He says, no, this is Innal masajida lillah. This is a place of sujood. And the places of sajda are for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Cut the fingers. And he gives him dalil from the Quran. Quran doesn't give a, faqtaw aydiyahuma, cut their hands off. The thief man or the thief woman. If they're, of course, proven. The Imam says, no. It's the fingers. He says, this is right. So officially, this is on an official level. It's not like sitting in a back room. Officially, and in those days, the court is official. Whatever happens in the court, it reaches the newspapers, it reaches the markets where people talk. It reaches the homes, it reaches far and wide. The fatwa of the mufti is rejected and the fatwa of Imam al-Jawad salamullah alayhi is accepted. This was it. From there on, things only got hard for Imam al-Jawad. This mufti writes to him. A few days, he says, what you did was something that will destroy you. So what do you mean? He says, you proved to everybody that the Imams of the Shia are right and we are wrong. You took his word over my word. Not only you disgraced me, you disgraced everything, and you accepted his authority, knowingly or unknowingly. Al-Mu'tasim says, we'll have him killed. And you know what the historians say? His niece, of course, is in the house of Imam al-Jawad, al-Fadl, la'natullahi alayha. This family, Ma'mun's family, all of them are involved in the killing of the Ma'sumin. Al-Ma'mun kills Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. His daughter, al-Fadl, and his son, Ja'far ibn al-Ma'mun. These two are involved with their uncle al-Mu'tasim in the killing of Imam Muhammad Taqi al-Jawad. They're all involved in the killing of the Ma'sumin, of the Imams. Son, daughter, father, and uncle. Now there is ikhtilaf. Some say it was poison in grapes. Some say he was poisoned in a drink. And some of the historians say it was poisoned in ice. Ice you put in, like ice cubes we have nowadays. Ice that was put into the drink. It was presented to Imam al-Jawad salamullahi alayhi. Now remember, the holy Imam is all alone. Imam is Gharib of Baghdad, by the way. If Sayyid al-Shahadah is Gharib of Karbala, Imam al-Jawad is Gharib of Baghdad. When he left Medina, he could not bring his son Ali al-Naqi al-Hadi. He could not bring his mother. The first time he left Medina, they said, Yabna Rasulullah, what if something happens to you? He says, no, I'll be back. But the second time he leaves Medina, he says, Yabna Rasulullah, what happens if you don't come back? He says, your Imam, sahibukum ba'di Ali. Your Imam after me is my son Ali. Now I don't know what was difficult for the holy Imam. But I do know for the Imams of Al Muhammad, it was always difficult saying farewell to the qabr of Rasulullah. The holy Imams would always, whenever they would leave Medina, they would before they leave, the last thing they would do is come to Rasulullah. You remember when Imam al-Hussein was leaving for Karbala, he comes to Rasulullah. He sheds tears until he falls asleep. He sees a dream, he sees Rasulullah. He says, Ya Rasulullah, take me with you. And Rasulullah says, Oh my son Hussein, Sha'Allah an yaraka qatila. Oh my son, oh Hussein, it is the will of Allah that you come to him through Shahadah, through martyrdom. And Imam al-Rida, now Imam al-Jawad had seen his own father, Imam al-Rida, when Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, when he comes where? When he comes to the qabr of Rasulullah, to bid his farewell, to bid his final farewells. Imam al-Jawad himself comes to the grave of the Prophet. This was always the difficult part for the Imams of Al Muhammad. Now he's all alone, he's ghareeb in Baghdad. There's nobody there except the wife who poisons him. It is said that when the poison enters the body of the Imam Salamullahi alayhi, that time that he spent was the most difficult time for the holy Imam. And by the way, it is said that in the final moments, every Imam was thirsty. You know why? Because it was the effect of the poison that it would make you very, very thirsty. You remember when Imam Hassan alayhi salam was vomiting blood out of his mouth? They would present to him water, they would present to him milk. And he would use that to kill his thirst. You remember when Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen was struck with the poisonous dagger? They said to him, bring him milk. And so they would give him milk. In the same way, Imam al-Jawad in his final moments would ask for water. Imam al-Rida would ask for water. All of the Imams, up to the 11 Imams, they all died thirsty. But I say, La yawm ka yawmika ya Aba Abdullah. Oh Imam al-Jawad, it is true you died thirsty, but no thirst comes close to the thirst of Aba Abdullah. Oh Aba Abdullah, but that's why the Imam says in Ziyaratul Nahiya, may my salams be on my grandfather, whose lips were ripped due to the extremeness of the thirst. Ajrakum ala Allah. And so Imam al-Jawad salamullahi alayhi, in that moment, you know when you're dying, you want your child around you. You want your family members around you. There are two Imams that were poisoned by their wives, Al-Hasan al-Mujtaba and Muhammad Taqiyul Jawad. But there's a difference between the two. When Imam al-Hasan was dying, he had his family members, he had his brothers, he had Imam al-Hussein, he had Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, he had his mother al-Baneen, he had his sisters Zainab and Kulthum. But let us go to Baghdad for a minute. When Imam al-Jawad was dying, nobody was there. She had locked the door from outside, that nobody could even come to give water to the holy Imam. He was dying of thirst. All of the Imams had this. You remember Muslim ibn Aqil died thirsty as well. Ajrakum ala Allah, when they gave Muslim water, his blood dripped into that bowl of water. He refused to drink it, so he died atshana. Imam al-Jawad is in a similar situation, but nobody's there to give him water. Ajrakum ala Allah, O Shia, where do I take you with this? Imagine Imam al-Jawad in this moment, and his ruh leaves the body, and the Imam closes his eyes. I say, oh Imam al-Jawad, you had one son, Ali al-Hadi, the Imam after you, but he was in Medina. But oh Imam al-Jawad, at least nobody took him as a prisoner. Oh Imam al-Jawad, your women were safe in Medina. But oh Imam al-Jawad, your grandfather Hussein had two Alis in Karbala that died. One Ali fell from the horse, and the other Ali fell from the hands of Aba Abdullah. Ajrukum ala Allah, I leave you with this. Oh Imam al-Jawad, I don't know what was difficult, but I know the most difficult time for Aba Abdullah al-Hussein was when he asked for water for his Ali al-Asghar. And what did they give him? You know what they gave him. But the Maqtal says, when they fired the three-headed arrow towards Ali al-Asghar, tears began to flow from the eyes of Aba Abdullah. You know, when Ali Akbar fell, Imam al-Hussein said something. He says, oh Bunayya, oh Ali, call me, your father cannot see. But when Ali Asghar fell from his hands, he said nothing. The Maqtal says there was a call from the heaven that says, Ya Hussein, da'hu, فَإِنَّ لَهُ مُرْضَعًا فِي الْجَنَّةِ. Oh Hussein, hand Ali Asghar to us. We will give him milk in Jannah. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم حسين.
بوت ہے مولا تقی کا ہے مومن و تابوت ہے مولا تقی کا مظلوم کما سوم کا فرزند نبی کا ہے مومن و تابوت ہے مولا تقی کا بے دینوں نے غربت میں اسے زہر دیا ہے ماتم ہے بپا شاہ خراساں کے وسیع کا مظلوم کما سوم کا فرزند نبی کا ہے مومن و تابوت ہے مولا تقی کا جینے نہ دیا شاہ کو 25 برس بھی مشکل تھا کیا جینا زمانے نے تقی کا مظلوم کما سوم کا فرزند نبی کا ہے مومن و تابوت ہے مولا تقی کا ہے لگتے دل سیدائے فاطمہ زہرا تابوت ہے دل بندے نبی سبت نبی کا مظلوم کما سوم کا فرزند نبی کا ہے مومن و تابوت ہے مولا تقی کا یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین کربلا والے ہمیں در سے رضا دیتے ہیں کربلا والے ہمیں، در سے رضا دیتے ہیں کربلا والے ہمیں، در سے رضا دیتے ہیں کربلا والے ہمیں، ہے کربلا والے ہمیں در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے ہمیں در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، تیر پر تیر بکھا کر یہ دعا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے ہمیں در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے دیتے ہیں، ہائے نانا تیری امت میں کہیں رحم نہیں، ہائے نانا تیری امت میں کہیں رحم نہیں، پانی جب مانگے تو یہ تیر چلا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے ہمیں در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے دیتے ہیں، ہم نہ مانگیں گے کبھی پانی چچا لوٹاؤ، ہم نہ مانگیں گے کبھی پانی چچا لوٹاؤ، خشک ہونٹوں سے یہ معصوم صدا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے ہمیں ہے، کربلا والے ہمیں در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے ہمیں در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، تیر پر تیر بکھا کر یہ دعا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے ہمیں در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے ہیں، قید وہ سونے بھی نہ پائے عابد، قید وہ سونے بھی نہ پائے عابد، جب بھی سوتے ہیں تو زنجیر ہلا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، مجھ کو پہچانو ذرا ظالم سوچو سمجھو، مجھ کو پہچانو ذرا ظالم سوچو سمجھو، مجھ کو مہمان بنا کر یہ دگا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے ہمیں در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے ہمیں در سے رضا دیتے ہیں، کربلا والے
سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا